Welcome gamers to another video on the D&D playtest information. They've released a few videos today talking about the playtest material that came out. We will do an in-depth breakdown of that playtest material this evening on Twitch. The link will be down in the description. And we're going to take a look at this video and give our reactions before having read any of the documentation, just to what they said. And then we will take a look at the actual changes later today. So let's go ahead and get started with the video.
So let's dive into the glossary. We've got some interesting things in the glossary. We also have some changes to spells. What all has changed?
So first, I'm actually going to talk about what hasn't changed
about
the rules glossary. So one of the important things in the playtest, the document itself says this, but it's important to reiterate, is that as people are joining us in this playtest journey over the next year and a half, is each UA will introduce new or revised material, but each one will also have a rules glossary. The rules glossary is just going to grow because each UA's rules glossary replaces the rules glossaries that occurred earlier in the playtest.
Gotcha.
So the other material...
So some of the things in the rules glossary in the previous playtest material will be changed and won't be the same. They do this and they talk about it in some of their other videos about like A/B testing. Like, okay, we're giving you this option and now we're giving you this option and we're going to see how you like those two options, which one of those two options you liked better. So that's kind of what they're doing. But to do that, they need you to stop using the old one and start using the new one. And it doesn't mean that the old one's gone away. The old one could still come back and be used, but it could still make the final version, but they want to also try other things. So the rules glossary, everything in the rules glossary is what's for this current playtest, and everything that's not is just whatever was in 5th edition.
Unless it's explicitly a revised version of something earlier in the playtest, like the Dragonborn in this UA replaces the Dragonborn from the Character Origins UA, but otherwise you can take all of these UAs and playtest the material in them together, but if one thing explicitly replaces another, you use the newer thing, but then the new rules glossary always replaces the previous rules glossaries.
And also, if something is omitted from the rules glossary, it doesn't mean that thing doesn't exist. Like we talked about Eldritch Blast before. Like, Eldritch Blast is still around, don't worry.
Yes, exactly. The rules glossary just contains material that either has a new definition or a rule that didn't appear in the 2014 Player's Handbook. If a rule in the game is not in the rules glossary, it means it's still in the game.
Right.
The rules glossary would have to explicitly say this rule is gone for the rule to vanish.
Perfect, that's a good way to define.
But what this also means, because each rules glossary replaces the previous rules glossaries, there will be a lot of material that reappears that has not changed since the previous UA. So
it would be nice if they flagged that in the document, and we'll see if they do or not, but if they could tell us, hey, this is the same as before, so we aren't like going back and looking and trying to compare and see what's different and what's the same. It'd be cool if they could just show us what had changed in the rules glossary too, in some fashion.
That's why I said I will start with the stuff that didn't change. And because now this rules glossary is getting bigger, and some of it will be the same, some of it will change. In this UA, we're introducing, for the first time in this series, a little change list in the rules glossary so that you can, at a glance, see here's what the new stuff or the revised stuff is. So when it comes to the new and revised stuff, I'll start with the new stuff. We have several spells that have new playtest versions. Spiritual Weapon, which is extremely powerful.
Yes, it is.
Now requires concentration.
Dang it.
But also another reason for this, and
it was an
I've talked
overpowered
in years
non-concentration
past about
spell.
this, that often when we're determining what requires concentration, what doesn't, it's not only a consideration of the spell's ongoing power round by round,
The narrative of it.
but it's actually also about speed of play. If a spell has the potential to bog things down because of the complexity of its ongoing effects, that spell, regardless of how potent it is likely to require concentration. And spiritual weapon is complex. It adds on later turns this extra attack each time. It meets all of the criteria for a spell that should require
I
concentration.
feel like you.
I don't think I like the idea that whether or not it requires concentration has to do with how many times you have to roll the dice at the table. Whether or not it involves concentration should be an in-game thing, not a mechanics at the table thing. If a spell, a spiritual weapon makes sense because you're having to keep the spell going and doing things with the spell. So from an in-game reason, it should have concentration because you're commanding it essentially to do stuff. Whereas something like mage armor, you're not actively doing anything with it within the game world. That's what should determine whether something is concentration or not whether or not it is requiring a lot of at the table play. I mean, I understand what they're going for. They want it to be not bog down the rounds, but I don't like making rules that don't make sense in the world you're playing simply to just get the mechanics at the table smoother. I don't know, that it's hard to put into words, but it just doesn't make sense to me that would be the determining factor as to whether or not it's a concentration spell.
Literally, as a player, need to concentrate on
Yes,
more.
yes. And frankly, we have considered in a way a design mistake of ours all these years that we didn't make it require concentration. Resistance, the cantrip, has a new playtest version here. It's akin to the version of guidance that we're playtesting, where it's reactive rather than proactive. And we're exploring this because this is a cantrip that, in contrast to guidance, which possibly sees too much use, resistance has seen very little use, and we want to see if making it a reaction will push it into the actually used category,
Right.
Which is important to us because we view the pages in the player's handbook as very valuable for the game. I mean, it's the rule book for the game,
Yeah.
and we want to make sure that the things that are there are actually being used and enjoyed by people. And so, as I mentioned earlier on today, if something hasn't seen much use, again, that's a candidate for replacement or enhancement.
Gotcha.
And so in this case, we are enhancing resistance.
Enhance.
Yeah, we're enhancing it. Yeah, and so those are some of the explorations we're doing specifically with spells in the rules glossary. And then we also in it have some tweaks to the definitions that have already appeared. And here we've been able to apply improvements based on playtest feedback. So we've clarified, for instance, the light weapon property. There were some questions about the new functionality, so we've clarified that. There was some questions about functionality in the definition of the attack action and the equipping and unequipping of things. We've clarified that. And there are some other clarifications, and again, you can go to the change list in the UA and see what changed. One of the bigger revisions is in the new influence action, where we have an entirely different method of determining the DC for the charisma check that you make. One of the bits of playtest feedback that we got is that people wanted to see the DC have a stronger relationship to the creature you're trying to influence.
Gotcha, yeah.
And so
Makes
that
sense.
creature now will influence directly what the DC is for your check.
Oh no. So if I'm trying to like convince Tiamat, it's like, well, what, DC 25?
Well, I mean, of course,
Okay, if you're trying to convince Tiamat of something, then the dungeon master shouldn't be making you roll. I mean, that's something that, you know, has been brought up a billion times. You don't have to allow the players to have a roll if what they're trying to do isn't something that can happen, especially in social encounters. You can't convince the king to give you his kingdom and name you the new king just because you rolled a critical on your influence check. That's not something that's going to happen. So it's the same thing with trying to convince Tiamat. That's not a viable use of the influence, and that's something that people have to try to remember. I mean, it shouldn't be hard to remember when a player says, "Oh, come on, just give me a roll." That's usually clue to the DM that you shouldn't give them a roll. That they're probably trying to do something that they know their character wouldn't be able to do. And once again, we get the fantastic face. I was paused at the best places.
of course, there's that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also it's critical to remind people that the influence action, and this was true in the previous version as well, makes it clear that a creature that is hostile to you
Not gonna, yeah.
can make it impossible for you to influence them at all with this check.
Yeah.
And
Even if they're not hostile to you, if you're asking for something that there's no way they would do, it's not going to work.
also critical to point out, especially based on some of the online conversations that I saw, is that the definition of the influence action really means it when it says, this is not mind control.
Right, yeah.
This is not magic. It's a conversation.
Yeah.
And only if the role-playing plays out in a reasonable fashion and the DM determines that the creature is even persuadable,
Right.
does your action have any chance of nudging them in a particular direction? The other key thing to point out in the influence action is that it's a different check for each course of action you're requesting. So you don't get to kind of say, and now here are the 20 things I want you to do, and I make one roll and you go do them all. No, it's basically one roll per request. Now, the DM on the flip side might decide that with a friendly creature, there's no roll necessary. That they believe in what your character is requesting, and they are happy to do it. But again, it's a give and take between what the player character is requesting, what the attitude is of the.
And sometimes we as dungeon masters forget about stuff like that. And when they attempt to do anything, we say, okay, we'll make a roll. It happens a lot, I've seen with the search action. It's like I've played in some games where the secret MacGuffin that was needed by the party was hidden, and so they had to search to find it. And then when they didn't find it, the dungeon master's like, oh, well, now because you all happen to roll poorly, you haven't found the secret MacGuffin, and I don't know where to go with the campaign. You don't always have to make people roll for things, and this is especially important in influencing. If you're trying to influence, a friendly NPC to do something, and if it's no imposition to them at all, then they're gonna do it. You don't need to have a roll. If you're trying to convince Tiamat to impale herself, she's not going to do that. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind on the influence. A lot of the things that I saw people complaining about on the influence really resolved down to, well, it doesn't matter how good they are at influencing, because there's no way that roll should ever be made. And there was some complaints between the influence action and the the testing of a 20 always succeeds and a 1 always fails. So like, hey, I'm trying to influence you to open the door for me, Mr. NPC, or to hold the door for me while I'm running. Yeah, he's going to hold the door. It's fine. This is probably a bad example, but I think the key here is you don't always have to roll for everything. If it's something that obviously is going to happen, then just have it happen. If they need to find the MacGuffin, then they find the MacGuffin. They've succeeded in completing the room, and they need to find the hidden thing. So just describe how they've found it. Oh, you so-and-so find, have them roll a search, and whoever gets the highest roll is the one that finds it. And then you can describe how they found the secret panel underneath the altar or whatever. But you don't always have to roll.
The NPC or monster, what the DM determines is appropriate, and then if a die roll is involved, well, then we'll see, will the D20 roll in your favor.
But you're probably not going to convince Vecna to help people.
Highly unlikely.
Probably unlikely.
Not highly unlikely. Not going to happen. So you say stuff like that and you open the door for players to say, oh, well, he said it's highly unlikely, so it's still possible. No, it's not. Vecna's not going to help you.
Yes. Unless they're undead.
Yeah.
So, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure.
All right, so there we have it. That is the Spells and Rules video and our thoughts on it. We'll take a look at those spells and rules tonight on Twitch, December 1st. So come and check us out. A link will be down in the description to our Twitch. If you enjoy these reaction videos or find what I'm saying useful at all, or if you just like coming to watch so that you can yell at me because I'm an idiot, then hey, that's great too. Then subscribe and you can come and yell at me every time I get a new video out. All right. We'll talk to you guys later. Until then, keep hacking the dungeon.